Hello everyone, this is Eric from Age Racing Central. I am here with Brian Young. And Brian, you are a game developer. What is the game that you are developing?
I'm currently working on Deathgrip, which is a sci-fi racing game with combat in it.
Yeah, and it looks really promising. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here with me. We are here to talk a little bit about Deathgrip primarily. But first of all, I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about you as a developer. Would you describe yourself as a hardcore gamer? Have you been playing video games all your life?
Yeah, I'd say so. I usually haven't spent too much time actually in like the racing scene though. I'm not like a race head. I played and still do mostly shooter games. So I grew up playing FPSs, and there's kind of a reason why I'm working on Deathgrip and not a shooter, but we can get into that in a bit. But yeah, I've grown up playing them. I would say
shooters.
Yeah, I would say
I'm that you primarily play.
Overall, I would say I'm pretty hardcore, and I think some of that has kind of seeped into Deathgrip. For whoever's tried it, it is pretty tough.
Yeah, for sure, and it is the focus on combat in that game.
Well, there's not a strong focus because it's supposed to be a racer first and foremost, and combat is optional. So I know a lot of people don't want to be forced into that, so that's why we left it as an option.
Okay, I see. You left it so you could please both sides, so to speak.
Yeah, because I just like blowing stuff up and weapons and guns in general. So, and there was an original concept of the game that was more focused on that. That was kind of the intent, but since the beginning we kind of shifted over to the more arcade track-based game, and so that has carried over, but I would have probably added it anyway because I think it's fun, but I know it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I see. And we are already talking about Deathgrip apparently. I had one more question about you. Yeah, what made you get into game development?
So I got interested in game development because it's kind of the crossroads of being an artist and a gamer. Like learning the 3D pipeline, there's a difference between like the practices of making something for a video game, making something for VFX for a movie or something like that, film. So I learned both and the differences, and as a gamer, I was curious to put some of that knowledge to the test, and I've always wanted to make my own project because I think it's pretty common for anyone who consumes media entertainment like games or movies to ask, like, what would be cool? What do I want to see? What do I want to experience? So that inevitably came up, and I've always had ideas for what I've wanted to do for like my ideal game. There's a lot of that when you're thinking of the design process, like what can you take from all these games that you've played and combine them or do differently to make them like the perfect experience that you want to play. So locally, I joined a game dev group and sought out, well, I needed a programmer because I only do the art side of stuff and the design side. But I joined this group and went to some game jams, and that's where I got my first taste of it. From there, my ambitions kind of grew. I didn't want to do just like game jams. So I started looking for someone more serious. And after the game jam stuff, I was thinking of what would be something simple but could be like a serious game. And I started a project with someone that was a shooter. It was a roguelike, someone in the group who was like a novice programmer and like learning himself. But we grouped up and started this FPS game. And after a time, it just didn't work out. He ended up ghosting me and like abandoning the project, which was strange. Everything was going well. And then later he came back and said he was going through some things in his life and he just like couldn't commit to it, and he just apologized. And that all worked out fine, but I didn't want to work on an FPS game anymore. So, because we were going hard at that for like 6 months or something, and had a good amount to show for it, I thought, for like the first attempt. So I kind of switched gears and was trying to think of like what else would be cool, because I like visceral game experiences where you can feel, where you go like, that's cool, or this feels really good, it just like hits you a different way. One of the games that did that in the past that wasn't an FPS was Star Wars Pod Racer. And no one's made anything like it since.
Are we talking the N64 era game?
Yes, that one. The one from 98?
Yeah, it must be something like that.
Yeah, it was on PC as well. So that was the platform I played it on. And I played a few other racers, XG3 and some other car racers, but I wasn't like a huge racing kid. I just liked sci-fi, and anything like that kind of appealed to me. And the idea of pod racing was just inherently cool. Like, you have the massive engines, you have generally you have these really powerful machines that go really fast. And what was unique about pod racer is that you'd go through environments. Unlike a lot of the games like F-Zero or Wipeout, where you're kind of just strapped to some kind of asphalt roller coaster ride, these actually went through terrain and had split paths and all these other things that made it really unique and not so monotonous.
Yeah, that's very clear in the trailers that you fly through several different types of environment. And like you mentioned, you rarely ride on an asphalt or track, pretty much like the pod racing game that you mentioned.
Yeah, and no one's really done anything. There's been other games that aren't AG racers that have done it. As some people have pointed out, like motocross. A lot of these things I haven't played, but I look at videos when people reference something, and that's a good example of going through natural terrain. There's just something to it that puts it into perspective, because when you're on a track like Redout or Wipeout or F-Zero, yeah, it's kind of like all these abstractions, because you're not going past anything. The only reference you have is kind of like other racers on the track. Anyhow.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, getting off on a tangent. So that was kind of the reason I wanted to do that, because that stuck with me as a kid. So when I started this new project, I started with my brother, who was kind of getting into programming. And the original idea for the game was an endless racer where you're going through traffic just straight. Okay. There's some old footage if you want to pull from that, but you'd be just going straight in traffic and blowing stuff up while you're getting chased by the gunship that was behind you. So you had to just go on for as long as possible and get more difficult, like more dense traffic, tougher enemies, like police vehicles and whatnot, military vehicles. And then that kind of changed into what it is now, because we brought on my brother kind of hit his limits. So there was another programmer who was involved. He came on for a little bit and then left. Then I found the programmer that I'm working with now, and he's, I would say, really seasoned, and I'm thankful for having him on board. Mm-hmm. And he's been able to kind of expand what we've been able to do since that original concept. So he was able to do AI. He volunteered to do online multiplayer and stuff like that. So that's in the game and working pretty well. So there's going to be a process of making it better, but it's it's a lot more refined than what it was and a lot more ambitious than what it was. So that's where I started messing with, when I go back for a bit, when we brought him on board, we started messing around at that time with a different racing model. And also I introduced different tracks than the endless highway that we had. And so that's kind of where it turned around. And that was a few years ago at this point, a couple of years.
I see. And your studio consists of 2 people. It's you and the programmer you mentioned.
Yep, primarily it's just us. My brother actually, in the meantime, from when he started, he was able to go through a programming program and become an official programmer, and is now working in tech doing programming. So he circled back, and now he's helping out in a greater capacity than he was ever able to do before, which is great.
Yeah, of course. And at this early stage, back with the concept of an endless racer, was it the pod racing inspiration very clear back then as well?
No, I would say it's not, because it was so limited. It was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't something that was possible because it was too involved.
I see. Yeah, my question was, of course, about the inspirations for the game, and you already mentioned pod race. It sounded like when you talked that the Star Wars pod racing is the main inspiration, more so than the bigger franchises like Wipeout and F-Zero.
Yeah, like I said, it was in the back of my mind, but it didn't make sense to pursue it because we wouldn't be able to. The physics that we used at the time didn't work because we were using real Unity physics and not. It wasn't an arcadey model like it is now. So we tried some tracks and it just did not work out. You'd constantly be like clipping in the cliffs and stuff and sliding way too much. Because vehicles that go that fast, realistically, they can't turn like they do in our game, or even like they would do in the Star Wars movie. It is fiction. So that model didn't work. And then you would need AI and stuff. So all that changed when we brought on the current programmer. Hank is his name.
Okay, so you had to program in some unrealistic physics. I guess you're not alone in that regard, but was that what you had to do to make the game play properly?
Yeah, it couldn't have been a real physics model. And I think that's how most AG racing games are. They use it to a little bit of extent, but it's just like if you ever played an FPS, you need to fake a lot of stuff. Like gravity is usually increased by like double or something just to make it feel right.
Yeah, okay.
So yeah, it's all about that kind of perception. And it took a while to get right too.
Yeah, okay.
I think it.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah, I think it feels good. I know it doesn't feel like some of the other games people are used to. Like, well, I guess like Wipeout and Redout. I never played the original Wipeout or F-Zero, but I think from watching F-Zero, it looks like it has pretty tight controls. And if anyone's played the original Pod Racer, it's pretty tight. So that's kind of the model that I based it off of.
Yeah, I see. And it was also when you think about pod racing, you think about the gimmicky vehicle design, but your inspiration was clearly also, racing in natural environments rather than on tracks. So that was an interesting take on the whole thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to combine it a little bit.
Yeah, you also talked about you had to work a bit on the physics. Is that where you start? I mean, what's the starting point when you develop a game like this? Is it the vehicle design? Is it the way the game should feel, or is it the physics? What would you say was the point that everything expanded from?
I'd say getting the controls right, because you can't really have a game without controls.
No, of course.
So it starts with the controls, you get that right, and then you can enhance the feel in a bunch of different ways. A lot of that comes with the camera work and like shake and the way it drifts behind. And then, I mean, of course you need a track that you need to test these things on. So you might build like a test track with really hard curves and jumps and dips and all these other things, just to see, like, test the limits of the controls, see where they can go. And from there, I think you can actually start designing real stuff, and get some variation in there.
So you try everything out, see what you are capable of and what makes sense, and then you design the tracks after that.
Yeah. Yep, and when it comes to the track design itself, I try to put in a good amount of variation. It's been a learning process for me because I'm not a race head guy, and I don't have too many references for things that do what I'm trying to do with the split jumps and the types of speeds, the type of jumps, the controls. So it's kind of just been a lot of me doing trial and error, seeing what feels right, then trying to work in the difficulty and making it not too unbearable, which is actually something I struggle with quite a bit. Because I tend...
Yeah, but that makes sense. Sorry for interrupting, but it makes sense to struggle with that because for a developer, it must be a very finely tuned balance. It can't be too easy, it can't be too hard. You need to find the perfect spot where people want to keep grinding through the levels and tracks.
Yeah, right. And I'd say even outside of, well, just generally, more of a hardcore guy, I like a challenge, and I know not everybody does. So when I design the tracks, and I'm also good at the game because I've been playing it forever. Yeah. So, so when I design the tracks, for me, if I make something boring, someone might find it difficult, and I have to kind of parse that out and watch them and get a sense of why and like what's going wrong. And then for like the more difficult tracks, I have to keep in mind like what I could do to make them accessible to beginners, but also make them a good challenge for more experienced players. And I've been able to do that a bit with the split paths, but yeah, it's been fun. That's probably the most fun aspect, is designing the tracks. And I think I'm getting better at it.
I see.
So
yeah, I see. So when the track is designed, do you sort of lay out the thing on a simple polygon layout and then you add the environment afterwards? Or do you think of, oh, this cliff environment work very, very well with this jump I had in mind? Or how does the process go there when you design the track?
I mean, it all starts out as, usually I will sketch the tracks out, like just a really basic, looks like a scribble basically. And then I'll design around it. You know, I'll think of like, what difficulty do I want this to be and what's kind of like the rough environment. Then sketch it out, and I won't spend too much time on it before I bring it into the engine and start testing it and see which turns are too wide, too sharp, which jumps can you make, or how long does the track take, because you don't want to have it too long, you don't want to have it too short. So, and after the gray box is done, I'll do a bunch of that testing, and then at the very end I'll make prefabs and assets and put those in and replace the gray box, and then originally remove all the test geometry.
Okay. I see. But when the track is designed, when you start the design of a track, is the environment, the surrounding, is it already decided before, or could that be switched mid the design?
It could basically be switched. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm looking at the surroundings of Jay. They are very, very varied for sure. You have the classic Tatooine-like desert and industrial cities and lush landscapes. It's really good variety here.
Yeah, some things, I mean, anything can be like kind of transformed to something else, unless you're really talking about tracks that have, at least if they're terrain, they could kind of be any environment. You can make like a desert layout into like mountain peaks. You know, you just drag all the land that you're not using down and suddenly you're on top of a mountain or something. It doesn't always work one-to-one. You probably have to make a bunch of adjustments. But
okay.
And areas where it'd be tough is if you have a track that's more refined, like not in the environment. Like there is one like that, the Maladin Extractor. Someone wants to look that up on YouTube. But that's more of like your traditional racetrack design, where you'd be going around an industrial facility, so it's not all ups and downs like random. Kind of, you are on a track more like F-Zero or Wipeout in a way. And converting that wouldn't be the same process.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Does a lot of time go into designing a little building that you swoosh by in 1.5 seconds, or is it a lot of effort to design the surroundings, the trees and the cliffs and stuff like that? Because your game is quite a high res. I mean, it's a lot of detail in the surroundings.
Yeah, I try to keep it pretty simple, because I mean, making final assets for a game, like if you had a AAA game or something, it could take a week to 2 weeks to make an asset. Depends what you're doing, and I don't have that time, so I try not to spend more than a couple or a few hours on it. Depends what it is. I made an add-on during this for Blender. I use Blender for 3D stuff. And I made an add-on for making rocks to expedite the process. So that's fairly simple, but doing designing buildings and trying to get those kind of set pieces does take some time. Not only to model, which is usually quick, but thinking of something that would be unique. Because some people have asked me, like, why don't I just make a whole bunch of tracks in the same environment and just like get it out? And I think it's just less interesting. Like, I want to be able to go to a place, and it is a ton more work on my end, but I'm hoping it pays off.
Yeah, I definitely hope so too. I mean, the trailers I've seen, it really makes very short cuts jumping back and forth between different environments. So you guys really want to show off all the different environments that you built.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm actually working on another one at the moment that's going to be the easiest track. because I tried to do that before
Okay.
a few times, and it just hasn't been working out because I always make them too difficult. But I think this one is the shortest, and it's going to be the easiest, and we're going to be adding that to the demo shortly.
Sounds great. I had one question about the vehicle design, because you talked about Star Wars pod racing, and in that game the vehicles look like there are two pods that sort of pulls the vehicle like on a sled. But when I look at the vehicles in your game, I mean, they do look... you can see where the inspiration comes from. But here, it looks like the front engines are still in front of the seating part, but they are sort of spinning on an axis. They are not dragging the pod on a sled. Was that intentional, or did Disney file a lawsuit or something like that?
No, it is intentional, just to avoid any direct conflicts like that. But some of the other designs too aren't exactly like pod racing designs. In Pod Racer you had like Neva Keys Craft, which was like a unibody thing. But I'm not partial to what Pod Racer did. I just am after the feeling of it. So any craft that looks powerful and looks like it'd be fun to drive, like I'm all for it. So I might even have vehicles in the future that are more similar to like F-Zero or Wipeout, like more sleek or something like that.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a free-for-all. It's not like there are really rules per se. So as long as people see something they like, that's fine with me.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense, of course. So there will be a couple of playable characters and vehicles in the final game. Will it be like in Star Wars pod racing, where a unique character is locked to a unique vehicle, like a sort of a character-based selection when you pick your craft?
No, it won't be like a 1-to-1. Yeah, I haven't thought of it like too much, but I don't plan on doing that. Eventually I would like to have other characters, but they wouldn't be tied to the machines per se, because I try to think of it as the machines are built by the manufacturers, and they have these people who are hired or assigned to the machines, and if they crash and die, whatever, and like another one is built or something. So it's not like some lore behind everything going together.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, they have interesting tying the lore into the whole thing as well. I think that's a... Do you think that story and lore is important in a racing game as well?
Not really, honestly. People probably don't give a shit about it. But I would like it to be interesting, because if I do make another game, I'd want it to be based in the same universe, even if it's not a racing game. So I want to make sure things make sense, and like all the locations are one planet right now, because a single planet, like we know from Earth, can be pretty diverse. So this planet isn't Earth-like, and there is a kind of a backstory that I won't get into now for how humans ended up there.
Yeah, sure. Okay. But does it make your design process easier when you have the sort of the story in the back of your mind?
No, because I think it's setting up rules and guidelines for yourself, and you have to consider what's possible. It's not just like a free-for-all where you have this mashup, because then you kind of retroactively have to go back and you'd have to change some things to align with the story. So you want to think of the story first and the rules that could affect the game and what you see in it and how things ended up there. So it is more work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's sort of like the opposite of what I said. It adds more work when you have the story.
Yeah, because you have to think of the story. If you don't have a story, you can just add whatever you want to the game.
Oh, okay, I see.
Unless it's like really basic.
Yeah.
I mean, because I have bigger plans, maybe it's more complicated. But if you had a game where you just had cars, or you had some like jet moto game or something where you're just like racing ski-doos, then it's not like you need a whole story behind it. But people are going to be asking, because it's sci-fi, people are going to be asking questions like, why is this way? Why is this that way? Why can't I do this or that? So
yeah, that's a good point as well. Yeah, one more question about the vehicles. When you design a vehicle, it will be a couple of vehicles in the final game. When you design a vehicle, do you design what you think is looking cool, or do you want to cater to the player who wants a sleek vehicle and the player who wants a robust but slower vehicle? How does that add to the process of designing a vehicle?
Yeah, well, it's both. I mean, I don't want to put something out there that's not cool. So
yeah, of course.
So yeah, that's always a factor in the back of my mind when I'm reworking stuff. And just to get into the design process of them, because you asked me before we started recording, is how are they designed? And I don't make concept art for them. I usually just start working on boxing things out in 3D. Before that, I try to think of how I could get something to be interesting. That usually is making it different. So I look at what I've done before and say, what can I change? And so if I have like 2 engines on this one, then I think, what would 4 engines look like? So I'll box this stuff out and start messing around with basic shapes and have a general style for what I have in mind. Is it going to be smooth, or is it going to have hard edges? Then just refine it from there. Once I get a silhouette that I like, then I start iterating on it and adding in more details and adding in the flaps and how the cockpit is going to be placed and all this other stuff. But a lot of it comes down to just making everything different from the one before, while still like fitting this mold for not being too far-fetched. That way you end up with a bunch of variants that people can choose from.
Yeah, I can see. I'm looking at the vehicles right now, and there's definitely variety, but design is very coherent, so to speak. So I think you really nailed that process. Yeah, that was interesting to hear from the animator. And I want to round this interview off by asking about, the whole concept, the sort of gameplay core of Deathgrip. It might be described as to be a bit on the technical side. If you compare to maybe F-Zero or Wipeout, there's few mechanics you have to consider, but there's a lot of depth in those cases in mastering those. But your game has quite a few mechanics from the get-go. If I read right off the Steam information page, it says here that you have afterburner, pitching, rolling, drifting, repairing, managing heat, and firing weapons. Apparently that was something that you wanted to do. Was it intentional? Was it the plan from the beginning to include all these mechanics and make this a bit, or would you agree with me, this is a bit of a more technical racing game?
Yeah, well, a lot of those are carried over from the original pod racing game. You could all those functions except the combat you could do. The original had drifting too, which not many people probably even knew about. But I'm a fan of having a skill ceiling available, but you don't have to reach it. Like if players want to just use thrust, brake, and turn, they can do that, and you can get by. My goal is that you can do that and win against the AI and get the trophies in the game and stuff like that. But you have these added functions that increase the skill ceiling that you might want to use depending on how you're racing, what your setup looks like, and how that works with upgrades. So because upgrades can dramatically change how it feels. Because we have a system in the game where, unlike Pod Racer, which was a linear upgrade system, this one is more flexible. So you can spec into acceleration or top speed or cooling or something like that, and you can outfit it for, like, optimize it for whatever track. If you have a track that has more straights than it does turns, then you could go into top speed, or alternatively, if it has more turns, you can get turning or better traction.
So you upgrade your ship as the campaign goes along, but you can also respec it for different races. Is that correct?
Yeah, you'll unlock parts that you can buy. Okay. You could install or uninstall. Okay. Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And some people in the demo, maybe we need to make this clear, just haven't discovered the upgrade menu. So they're suffering for quite a bit. But the demo, like, it's tough to strike a balance between, like, not allowing everything. Like, you don't want to give people the best stuff in the game, like where it feels the best with, like, the top speed, because it would kind of like spoil it in a way. So I put in, like, some limited upgrades, and there's the 3 difficulties, and novice is intended for beginners, and they have no upgrades, and then veterans have like 6 upgrades or something like that. So the intent is that you buy the upgrades and you can compete. But some people will think like, I'm not a novice, I've played racing games before, so they just jump it like straight into veteran, and then they get completely wrecked and wonder why. And maybe it's just I don't know, like different ways of balancing things. But I thought it was a fair approach. But I encourage people, if they play the demo, try it against, start with novice. You see where you get with it. You have some starting money, and you can buy upgrades right off the bat, and that should immediately make it much easier to win against novices. Then you can move up and try to beat vets.
Okay.
And don't do combat before you do racing, because that's like an added layer of things you need to pay attention to, and you're just going to regret it.
Oh, okay.
So I don't expect people.
I see.
Yeah, like it comes down to like, what are your expectations? And my expectations are not that people would be using all the functionality and going into combat on their first try. It's like, learn it at your own pace. Okay. It's like, you don't need to rush into things, because that will probably be more detrimental than if you didn't. And it is a learning process, and you will be crashing a lot, just like you probably would in like real life with one of these things.
I guess so. Yes, you cater towards the audience that wants to spend some time with learning the mechanics of the game. What you described doesn't sound like you're making a super casual game, even if you want players to be able to, like you said, accelerate, brake, and drift. But your audience that you described seem to be a bit more on the dedicated side.
Yeah, because I think that's how I approach games. I just don't have the mindset of super casual, because I'd probably honestly get really bored. So
yeah, okay.
Like, to make it more accessible, I don't want to change the controls or the way anything works, because I think they're fine. But that's part of the reason why I'm making the new track, which is much more forgiving and clear where you're supposed to go, and like more entry level, because maybe some of those cues are what I'm missing. So I think the difficulty right now might come down to the track design. So, but it's always trial and error. So we'll put out the new track, and we'll see how players do with it. I think it's probably one of my best designs so far. I'll share more about that really soon. It's getting in a good place.
Yeah, we are looking forward to that. All right, Brian, before we say goodbye, Deathgrip has a demo available that you've mentioned. Where can people find the demo?
Yep, right on Steam. Just search Deathgrip. It should pop right up.
Perfect. And if people want to learn more about Deathgrip, where should they look on the internet?
Well, I encourage people, if you're really into it, I'm always taking feedback and love chatting with the community. And we've already had like several people who joined who there's actually time trials in the game, and if you do a time trial, you get your time posted to a leaderboard, and there have been people who have been going super hard at the leaderboard. There's a handful of players who have been really dedicated to it, so that's been great to see. So it's kind of active, and if it's up your alley, then I encourage people to join the Discord and stop in. But if you want to see the other links, then you can just go to Reclaim Interactive, and there's all the links on that page there right at the top.
Yes, and of course, any viewer will find the links to the Discord, the YouTube page, and your website in the video description. But that was all the questions I had for now. Thank you so much, Brian, for taking your time to make this interview.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you here. And thank you everybody for watching. I am Eric from AD Racing Central, and I'll see you in the next video.